What does it sound like when someone is crying for help, but the only sound they let you hear is praise? Imagine a voice so powerful it filled arenas, a voice that moved strangers to tears, that made people feel like God was speaking directly to them. That voice belonged to Osinachi Nwachukwu. She was Nigeria's beloved gospel star, a woman of faith, a woman of song. Millions knew her name. Millions sang her words. Millions were moved by the sound of her voice. But behind the music, behind the lights, behind every note she sang to God, she was living in silence, a silence no one chose to hear. This is the story of Osinachi Nwachukwu, the woman who gave her voice to the world and never got it back. On November 12, 1979, in the city of Owerri in Imo State, Nigeria, a girl was born who would carry a gift most people only dream of. Her name was Osinachi, and from the very beginning, those who knew her say she was different. She grew up in an Igbo family, surrounded by the rhythms and traditions of southeastern Nigeria. The Igbo people have always held music close to their spirit, in their ceremonies, in their churches, in their everyday lives. For young Osinachi, music wasn't entertainment, it was language, it was prayer, it was the most honest way she knew how to speak. Friends and family recall that she began singing in church as a very young girl. Her voice, even then, wasn't ordinary. It carried something deeper than just sound, a sincerity, a weight, a kind of ache that made people stop and listen. Osinachi pursued her education with quiet determination. She attended school with the kind of discipline her community admired, a young woman who understood that purpose required preparation. But even through the long school days, the dreams never left her. She always came back to the music, to the worship, to the feeling of lifting her voice and meaning every single word. Those who grew up with her describe a girl who was gentle, reserved, deeply spiritual, not in a performative way, but in the way that some people are simply wired differently from birth. She didn't chase attention. She carried something quiet within her, something steady. She began writing her own songs in Igbo, her mother tongue, worship music that drew directly from the raw, honest core of her faith. She wasn't interested in fame, not yet. She was interested in truth, and the truth she found, she put into melody. Throughout her late teens and early 20s, Osinachi became a recognizable presence in church circles across Nigeria. She sang at Dunamis International Gospel Center in Abuja, one of Nigeria's most powerful and well-known megachurches, and quickly became a lead worship leader. People didn't just enjoy her singing, they were changed by it. There's a particular quality some singers have, the rare kind where the audience doesn't just hear notes, but feels something shifting inside them. Osinachi had that, completely and effortlessly. She went on to release her own gospel music, songs in the Igbo language that celebrated God with an authenticity that couldn't be manufactured. She was building something real, something lasting. But even as her musical journey was beginning to bloom, another chapter of her life had already begun, one that would cast a long shadow over everything that came after, the song that changed everything. In 2017, everything changed. Nigerian gospel artist Prosper Ochimana was working on a song, a worship piece that would reach deep into the faith of millions of people across Nigeria and the African continent. He needed a voice. He found Osinachi. The song was called Ekwueme, an Igbo word that means, "he who does what he says." It was a declaration of divine faithfulness, of trust in something greater than circumstance. When Osinachi sang those words in the studio that year, no one could have known what was about to happen. Ekwueme didn't just become popular, it became a phenomenon. It swept across Nigeria with a force that few gospel songs had managed before. Churches played it every Sunday. It became a staple at weddings and funerals. People listened to it in their cars, in their kitchens, on their phones at 2 a.m. when the world felt too heavy. The song reached into places where language should have been a barrier and broke right through. Because something about Osinachi's voice transcended translation. Overnight, Osinachi Nwachukwu became a household name across Nigeria and the wider African diaspora. Invitations poured in. Concerts, ministry events, recording collaborations. She appeared on stage with some of Nigeria's most respected gospel figures, including Pastor Paul Enenche of Dunamis Church, who featured her on his own recordings. The accolades followed. Gospel awards, recognition, respect. She was becoming something that very few artists in any genre ever fully become. Not just a musician, but a symbol. To the Christian community in Nigeria and across the world, Sister Osinachi, as she was affectionately called, represented something pure. She was the voice that reached heaven. She was the sound of surrender. She was proof that God still moves through human hands. And in the eyes of those who followed her ministry, her personal life seemed to match. She was married, a mother of 4 children, a woman rooted in her faith, in her family, in her calling. Her husband, Peter Nwachukwu, was present at most of her performances. He managed many of her engagements, traveled with her, sat backstage as she sang. From the outside, they looked like a partnership, a team built on shared faith. But appearances, as we would come to learn, can be profoundly, devastatingly misleading. Behind every standing ovation, behind every altar call that her voice inspired, behind the image of the devoted wife and gospel minister, there was something else entirely, something no one in that congregation could see, something she had learned to keep perfectly hidden. They say the greatest prisons are the ones with no visible bars, the ones where the captive stays not because they cannot leave physically, but because they cannot find a way out emotionally, spiritually, or practically. That is where Osinachi lived, for years. According to testimonies from her family, close friends, and colleagues, and later from her own children in a court of law, Osinachi's marriage to Peter Nwachukwu was not what it appeared to be. From early in their union, she reportedly endured abuse, physical, emotional, psychological. But Osinachi did not speak about it publicly. She kept going. She kept singing. She kept showing up. Those close to Osinachi describe a pattern that is achingly familiar to those who study coercive relationships. Peter Nwachukwu, by multiple accounts, was not simply her husband. He had made himself the gatekeeper of her entire life. He controlled her finances. He received her performance fees. He monitored her movements, her phones, her social media, her schedule, her relationships. He was always present, not as a loving companion, but as a watchful authority. Fellow gospel artist Frank Edwards later recounted a moment in a recording studio that stopped him cold. Osinachi had wanted to record a song in Igbo, her own language, the language of her most honest expressions. Her husband slapped her, right there, in front of others. And then life continued as if nothing had happened. That is the particular horror of normalized violence. It doesn't always announce itself with dramatic screams. Sometimes it happens in quiet rooms, and then it gets folded away, and the world moves on. To understand why Osinachi stayed, you have to understand the world she lived in. In many deeply religious communities, not just in Nigeria but around the world, marriage is treated as sacred and inviolable. Divorce carries enormous social and spiritual weight. It can mean judgment from the community, questions about your faith, whispers about what you must have done wrong. Osinachi was not just any woman. She was Sister Osinachi. She was a worship leader. She was a symbol. The thought of what leaving would mean, publicly, spiritually, professionally, was not a simple calculation. Her twin sister Amarachi Eze would later testify in court that Osinachi had reached out, that she had shared glimpses of what was happening. But Osinachi always pulled back. She always asked her sister not to say anything to the church, not to tell the pastor. She believed or hoped that he would change, that prayer would be enough, that faith would be enough. At one point, she did leave. Her mother would later confirm that Osinachi had separated from her husband for over a year. She had found a way out. And then the church intervened. Her husband pleaded. Pastors urged reconciliation. She was persuaded to return. She went back. In retrospect, the people who knew her say the signs were there. When she didn't appear in church for days, those who knew the reality quietly understood that something must have gone wrong behind closed doors. There were absences that couldn't be explained. Moments where she looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Moments where she seemed to disappear inside herself, even while standing on a stage in front of thousands. One source close to her family described her marriage simply as hell on earth. And yet the world saw a gospel singer. The world heard a woman praising God. Her 4 children were living inside that hell with her. Witnesses. Small, helpless witnesses to what their father did to their mother. And he made sure they knew to stay silent. A family that appeared faithful on the outside was fracturing on the inside. And no one came. Not in time. In early April of 2022, Osinachi Nwachukwu was admitted to the National Hospital in Abuja. She was on life support for 5 days. On April 8, 2022, she did not survive. She was 42 years old. She had 4 children. She had a voice that had touched millions. And in the hours after her death was announced, her husband issued a statement claiming she had died of throat cancer. But the story didn't end there. Almost immediately, the people who had known Osinachi, the friends who had witnessed her suffering, the colleagues who had seen what happened in recording studios and backstage corridors, began to speak. On social media, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece, post by post. Lifestyle blogger Amanda Chisholm described Peter Nwachukwu as a control freak, whose only interest was to maximize profit from his wife's voice. Singer Frank Edwards described the moment he watched the slap in the studio, the moment no one challenged, the moment Osinachi simply absorbed and moved on. Osinachi's sister spoke. Her mother spoke. The word cancer began to dissolve in the face of what was actually being said. Within days, the FCT Police Command confirmed what many had feared. Peter Nwachukwu was arrested. On June 3, 2022, Peter Nwachukwu was formally arraigned before the Federal Capital Territory High Court in Abuja. He faced 23 charges, among them culpable homicide, domestic violence, spousal battery, criminal intimidation, and cruelty to children. He pleaded not guilty. The prosecution presented 17 witnesses. 25 documents were submitted as evidence. Among those who testified were Osinachi's own children who had been told over and over again to keep their families secret. Children who now stood in a court of law and told the world what they had seen inside their home. What they described was not an accident. It was not illness. It was years of suffering, years of violence, and one final act that had stolen their mother from them forever. The death of Osinachi Nwachukwu did not pass quietly. Across Nigeria, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media filled with grief and outrage in equal measure. The hashtag Justice for Osinachi spread rapidly across platforms. Women shared their own stories. Men added their voices. Religious leaders were confronted publicly about the silence of the church in cases of domestic violence. It was the kind of national reckoning that is both necessary and devastating, because it takes tragedy to begin the conversation that should have been happening all along. Prominent Nigerian gospel singer Nathaniel Bassey wrote online that her voice had thundered and reverberated powerfully in worship, calling her loss immeasurable. Activist and writer Solomon Bucci raised the uncomfortable question that many were too afraid to ask. Why does religious culture so often tell abused women to stay? The trial lasted nearly 3 years. 3 years during which Osinachi's children, her family, and her community waited for the legal system to see what they had always known. On April 28, 2025, Justice Njideka Nwosu Iheme of the FCT High Court in Abuja delivered her ruling. Peter Nwachukwu was found guilty of culpable homicide. He was sentenced to death by hanging. Women's rights advocates called it a landmark judgment, not because it undid what had been lost, nothing could, but because it sent a message that echoed far beyond that courtroom, that abuse cannot hide behind closed doors forever, that silence, even the silence of saints, eventually breaks, that the law can and must be the voice that victims were never allowed to have. Osinachi's 4 children, 3 boys and a girl, were minors when their mother died. They witnessed things no child should ever witness. They kept secrets no child should ever be asked to keep. And then they walked into a courtroom and told the truth. Following their father's arrest, they were placed under protective care by extended family. The Nigerian government and concerned individuals provided scholarships, counseling, and support. They are growing up now, without their mother's voice to guide them, but because of their courage, because they spoke, a little girl somewhere might not grow up in the same fear their mother lived in. Osinachi Nwachukwu sang about faith, about a God who keeps his promises, about surrender and trust and the steadiness of something greater than yourself. She sang those words with her whole heart, and she meant them. But faith, real, living, breathing faith, cannot ask a person to remain in danger. It cannot demand that a woman swallow her pain in exchange for the approval of a congregation. That is not devotion. That is a cage built from scripture. Osinachi deserved protection. She deserved a church that would have held her husband accountable. She deserved friends who could offer her a safe door to walk through. She deserved a world that takes a woman's pain as seriously as it takes her praise. Instead, she was given silence. And silence, in cases like hers, is never neutral. Silence is a choice. But her story, the one that was supposed to stay behind closed doors, is being told now. In courtrooms, in newspapers, in documentaries, in conversations between women who see themselves in her. Her voice, the one that was taken from her, is still speaking. Final reflection. If you knew someone was suffering in silence right now, what would you do differently than the world did for Osinachi? Think about that question. Sit with it. Because the answer, the honest answer, might change someone's life. Stories like Osinachi's deserve more than a headline. They deserve to be remembered, studied, and learned from. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or look at the world a little differently, please share it. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell us what this story meant to you, or tell us about someone who inspired you by refusing to be forgotten. And if you believe that stories like this one matter, subscribe, because there are more voices that deserve to be heard, and we will keep telling them.